So let me address a warm welcome to all those present today in my capacity as a speaker in the DiLCo Lecture Series and not as a host. My talk today is from the research I have been carrying out besides coordinating DiLCo on graphic cues and heterographic practices in digital discourse, the case of alternating caps. This research is funded by DiLCo, it focuses on little signs that do a lot of pragmatic work and a lot of ideological work, as I hope to be able to show you in the course of the following 40 minutes. I have been trying in this research to develop a total linguistic fact approach to graphic cues in digital discourse, whereby their structure or their formal structure, their use in digital discourse, in digitally mediated interactions and comment sections and so on, and people's meta-pragmatic awareness about written language variation, punctuation, variations in typography and things like that are seen as interrelated. I have been also interested in developing mixed methods, methodologies and techniques, because as I will also try to show in this talk, I consider graphic cues, features of punctuation, spelling, typography, ideal bridging points between more quantitative and distributional on the one hand, and more qualitative interactional approaches to the analysis of digital language data. And so what you will see in the analytical part, which I have replicated in other papers and presentations, is a mixed methods procedure that involves the computational data collection, quantitative distributional analysis based on larger amounts of data, but also a macro-analysis, micro-analysis of graphemic variation, and the interactional analysis of graphic cues, as I call them, in sequential environments. I hereby want also to acknowledge the support by my former doctorate student and now associate, Jannis Androutsopoulos, who is a computational social linguist here with us in Hamburg and has been supporting me with the computational part of data collection, token retrieval, and things like that. To give you some orientation, during the 2010s, research on digitally mediated interaction has shed new light on the role of written language features in the coordination and contextualization of coordination and contextualization of mediated interaction. Punctuation signs, diacritics, typographic contrast, and other written features have been shown to provide resources to participants in written mediated exchanges for various practices of interactional coordination and stance taking. These phenomena and the practices they are deployed in have been discussed with bracket terms such as typographic tone of voice, CMC cues, graphic cues, prosodic orthography in some other research. Despite some differences in the features considered in each case, a common trend in this more recent research from the late 90s and early 20s has been to go beyond the deviation approach of Ainley CMC research, which described graphic phenomena only in terms of their difference to standard written language. Instead, the question is now how graphic variation, features, cues work as a contextualization device to convey affective and interactional stances against the backdrop of graphic ideologies. So, for example, this is one of these approaches, the book by Gretchen McCulloch that has a chapter on typographic tone of voice, and there she covers different typographic and or punctuation spelling phenomena that do some sort of pragmatic work, and some of them are closer to standard written language. Others are things that evolve in internet communication, in online communication. This list includes also a predecessor of the alternating caps that I will use as a case in point below, which McCulloch called Studley caps, mixed capitalization, early in the day, although she describes this mixed capitalization with a different pragmatic meaning than the one we have today in German, Greek, and also American English data. Here's another list by Erika Darix, who has a whole catalog of micro-level features and discourse strategies that are used to replace, as she says, non-verbal communication and writing. This is a more disparate classification that she has. Observe that McCulloch has only typographic and graphic features in the broad sense. With Darix, we have also content elements, emoji, and interjections, laughter, and other things like that. My own term, graphic cues, is heavily influenced by interaction and sociolinguistics theory, and in particular by the notion of contextualization cues. So I think of graphic cues as an open-end set of written language features that have various pragmatic and interactional functions in text-based online communication. Open-end set means that such graphic cues evolve and emerge in the course of time, and we see today, for example, things that have not been described in the literature a few years ago. So we have an evolution process whereby more and more graphic cues come up, and some more recent graphic cues replace others in doing roughly a similar kind of pragmatic work, indexing how messages are organized, what interrational stances people wish to convey, and how the elocutionary force of their messages is to be understood. Now, note two things. First, I'm interested in non-referential semiotic features. So when I talk about cues, I don't mean cues of content, but I mean cues in the linguistic form that gain some pragmatic functions. Second, some of these points here about graphic cues would apply to emoji as well. So we would have to discuss that emoji, of course, have some content in a sense. They have some iconic content, but emoji too can be used as contextualization cues. And we have had other lectures in this series talking about emojis and their pragmatic functions. Now, my research in the frame of DiLCo focuses on graphic cues that index double voicing in digital discourse. And I'll talk about double voicing and voice a little bit more in the following. And I have been particularly interested in two features that I have been tracing across different languages and across different scripts or writing systems. The first is the indignation mark, a twist on the iterated exclamation mark that involves inserting digits or numerals in a chain of exclamation marks, such as the example you see here. The second feature, the one I'll be talking about today, is alternating caps, a seemingly random alternation of upper and lowercase characters within a word or phrase. All differences aside, both these graphic elements or graphic features index a dissociation of the person who writes a comment or a tweet or whatever from a particular segment of what they write, of their post or comment, so that this segment, for example, here, this phrase or this clause, climate change is a hoax, so that this segment that is either cast in this typographic variation or is terminated by an indignation mark, this segment is not endorsed by the writer, but attributed to a different social position, to a voice, a Bakhtinian voice, we would say, that readers might be able to identify based on further contextual information, and of course, on information in content. Now, my interest in this research is first in understanding how graphic cues work, how they are distributed, how their graphic variance functions, what are the limits of graphic variation. The other end or the other dimension of my interest in this research is to understand how graphic cues are deployed by people in public online communication to produce social contrasts and social differences in the most basic case between what they, the writers themselves, believe and what others in society, other social positions believe or hold true. And graphic cues are deployed to create contrast between viewpoints and between the social groups or ideologies that represent these viewpoints. And it is towards this end of my interest that I draw on the notion of heterographia, which in itself is a term modeled in analogy to heteroglossia, Bakhtinian heteroglossia, that has been taken up very influentially in all areas of social linguistics in the last decades. As Benjamin Bailey put it in a 2007 paper, heteroglossia as a concept addresses the simultaneous use of different kinds of forms of signs or signs. This can be graphic variation. Heteroglossia can also involve, in the most well-known cases, bilingual, multilingual talk or translanguaging. And second, the tension and conflicts among those signs based on the socio-historical associations they carry with them. So the term heteroglossia does not just refer to different styles of language or different languages used within a stretch of discourse, but to the use of different elements of language that belong historically and socially belong in different realms of language, and that sort of produce and represent some sort of conflict, social conflict, ideological conflict by being used. Several researchers have applied heteroglossia to digital discourse analysis. Anna Deumert, Caroline Tag, myself. In an earlier paper, I pointed out that heteroglossia is the outcome of purposeful and often artful semiotic activity. So heteroglossia does not just occur, but is something that is fabricated. It is fabricated as people, speakers, writers, more or less juxtapose different ways of language, different styles, registers of language, which in turn index different social positions, ideologies, histories, and things like that. Now, heterographia or heterography has been used and has been made popular to some extent by Jan Blommaert, who has defined heterography as the deployment of literacy means in ways that are different from the orthodox ones. Blommaert has taken this reading also to online language and communication, where he, however, equates heterographic codes to texting and chatting codes of the wait for me kind. So this is kind of what people used to call textese back in the day. And he basically, Blommaert's position is that this is how heterographic codes emerge and can be seen online in textese or similar distortions of the official codified form of language or visual shape of language in terms of language play. Now, I think that this equation of heterographia with textese, or this exemplification of heterographia by textese, does not do justice to what happens with graphic cues, such as alternating caps and the indignation mark. I think that graphic cues call for a different approach. And fundamental to this observation or to this claim is that graphic cues also occur in environments of otherwise orthographic writing, often as part of elaborate comments by highly literate writers or commenters. So it is not the case that graphic cues, such as the one of interest here, work in co-occurrence with other elements of textese or non-standard spellings. Sometimes, often, this is not the case at all. We have often masses of regulated orthographic writing, but at the same time, on top of that, a very purposeful deployment of certain graphic cues, which obviously do some sort of pragmatic work in highlighting perspectives of speakerhood. Who speaks? Who holds the particular opinion that is written or cast in a certain spelling or in a certain followed up by a certain punctuation? So I think that it would make more sense, also in view of the data I will be presenting, not to talk about graphic cues and not to think of them as deviations from a written standard, but mainly to think of them as a strategic manipulation of visual language for the construal of social positions, social positionalities in discourse. So from that perspective, graphic cues do two things at the same time. First, they create visual difference from default typography and punctuation. They stand out as a salient feature against an inconspicuous backdrop, against a backdrop of standard writing or default spelling. And this is how they create their attractiveness, or how people become aware of them and attracted to them. And at the same time, they provide resources for the construction of social ideological difference in public online discourse. By using graphic cues, participants make salient viewpoints that they evoke in their own words, in their contributions, but do not identify with, they distance themselves from. Now, to give you an example of that, here is a piece of the Reddit data I will present in a minute. And so you have here a discussion in the most popular Greek channel on Reddit, and I'll be talking about that in a second in more detail. And the context of this discussion is the COVID-19 situation in Greek hospitals. The initial post to the one to which these comments are attached presents a graph of new hospital entries, hospital exits and deaths. So a statistical graph about the situation in the hospitals. The second comment here, we'll look at the second comment, and you have the translation to the right. The first comment says, very interesting, thanks so much, referring to the graph, okay, the graph posted at the start of this thread. A morbid point, the first comment goes on, but perhaps we need the entries, exits and deaths ratio. So it's a sort of statistical remark. The second comment then juxtaposes a typical COVID denier statement, which is cued with alternating caps and the indignation mark at the same time, to the commenter's own appraisal of the graph. So the second comment goes, 3,400 hospital entries in 1 week, 3,000 the one before, 3,000 the one after. Then a line break, then comes a bit that is set in quotation marks, in alternating caps, and terminated by an indignation mark, saying just a simple flu. And then another line break, and then the speaker, the commenter, returns to his own perspective, praising the graph, saying a nice job. So what happens here is that somebody, the commenter here, uses graphic manipulations of visual language to juxtapose their own perspective on a social crisis to another, to a typification of another social ideological perspective on the same crisis, a typical COVID denier statement, just a flu. And all these graphic cues make the decisive difference. They point out even to the the casual browser or observer that this is not the commenter's own perspective. It's just another voice, another social perspective blended in and denied out of the context. Now, it is interesting that both the alternating caps and the indignation mark rarely, if ever, come up in private messaging. I can say this, of course, for everyone, but based on the collections of private messaging data that we have in the German-speaking world, such as WhatsApp Switzerland or Mocoda, there are no instances of these graphic cues there. From this, I conclude that graphic cues and the heterographic practices they are deployed in are characteristics, are resources for public anonymous discourse, polylogues, as it has been called. So a multi-party participatory discourse supported by the affordances of whatever digital platform is being used, initiated by a prompt, often a media piece made available to discussion. In the previous case, the prompt was a graph, and unfolding in common sequences. And we know from a lot of research in linguistics, discourse, digital discourse analysis, also in communication science, that digital publics engage in common sections, in practices of evaluating social facts, evaluating the news. And we also see in this research how people use cues, graphic cues, and other resources to voice and evaluate different political positionings. Okay, and also to align to other participants. So graphic cues from this broader perspective are key to styling and positioning practices. And by repetition, they become enregistered with social persona or activity types, which are evoked in public deliberations. So for example, we see the alternating caps designing or styling bits of language that are attributed to margin positions, to extreme right positions, conspiracy theoretic positions, to these are odd statements, crazy statements, not the commonsensical perspective. You never see alternating caps designing or styling a commonsensical statement that the writer themselves agree on or identify with. It's always the voice of the other. I now want to turn to alternating caps to go into more detail into how alternating caps emerged and how they work, and also how they are distributed in data. So the birth date of alternating caps is estimated in May 2017, when a meme from the American animated television series SpongeBob went viral. Now, so this meme, this is one of two memes that are archived on knowyourmeme.com and other similar archives of internet folklore. So this meme, the left one, shows the character SpongeBob with added caption that represent a dialogue. One instant we see a dialogue between Americans and Republicans. Americans saying that they need healthcare, Republicans repeating the same statement, but in alternating caps, okay? And remember the meme, this particular meme called Mocking SpongeBob. So it's the repetition as mocking that is cast here in alternating caps. To the right side, you have something non-political. A boyfriend says, I don't even know her like that. And the me perspective repeats the same statement in a mocking tone. So what happens in after that is that the pattern, the spelling pattern to mock caught on and was sort of disentangled from the image. So people started using the spelling pattern, the typography pattern, in order to do pragmatic work with no relation to SpongeBob or mocking SpongeBob at all. And this is how, in the very short time of 5 or 6 years, alternating caps spread across different languages and different scripts. So you see here to the top an example from English, and then to the left from Dutch, to the right from German, and to at the bottom from Greek, all using alternating caps together, and sometimes together with other graphic cues, with other features of punctuation and typography, doing some sort of pragmatic work, and signaling reported speech, or signaling an absurd or marginal or something like that, or crazy statement, such as, again, here, the indignation mark. There has been hardly any research on alternating caps so far. I've come across a couple of blog pieces by academics or half academic pieces, but there is a Wikipedia entry, there is an entry in the very useful Urban Dictionary, and there is a Chrome browser plugin where you can paste text in and have it transformed into alternating caps. The important thing before we move on is to make clear the difference between alternating caps from other patterns of typographic contrast. So alternating caps are not the regular type of capitalization within a word. If you see these German examples here to the left, Bahncard or meat quality, it says here, or even the hashtag here, Black Lives Matter, you do see, of course, capitalization or capital letters followed by lower type, but this happens here at morphemic boundaries. So we have within word capitalization with the aim of illustrate, highlight, and make perceivable morphemic boundaries within compounds. And in other cases, such as in English, American English, we do have the habit in some registers or in some genres to capitalize all words or all words of the main parts of speech. Now, alternating caps are not the same pattern, but they are the sort of random alternation between some lowercase letters, some uppercase letters. In the canonical case, you have one of these and one of the other, uppercase, lowercase, and going on for a couple of words or for a longer clause. In other cases, we have one lowercase and more uppercase. This varies a lot. There is no standard. Which also goes to show that not everyone uses the same browser plugin to create alternating caps. People type them in themselves. But so this is a form of capitalization that does not aim to highlight morphemic boundaries. It aims to be chaotic in a sense. It doesn't form a follow a form. It doesn't follow a form follows function principle. There's only one piece on research I've come across, and this is a PhD thesis on sociophonetics by Maria Heath from a couple of years ago. And she tests experimentally how people speak out different kinds of prosodic orthography, capitalization, alternating caps, and other things. Now, what Heath did is to show people the same tweet in alternating caps and in default spelling, and to compare their phonetic prosodic realizations, okay? And she expected people to use a mocking tone, so to voice in spoken language alternating caps with a sing-sangy voice or with a mocking tone. She does find a difference in prosodic delivery between tweets in alternating caps as opposed to default spelling, but she also finds a lot of variability, a lack of consistency between people who are more or less familiar with the pattern, and also depending on the items that are said in alternating caps themselves. So the voicing out is not as uniform or consistent as expected. In my own research, I turned to data from Reddit, a social media platform organized into discussion forums, which are, as a rule, moderated and often organized by theme. In the typical participation architecture, people would choose a subreddit, people follow a subreddit and follow the discussions there. And when people want to post, they often have to select a flair, so to a topical classification of their post. By posting, they open up thread, and within this thread, messages or comments and reply comments can come up. Distinctive affordances of Reddit include the up and down voting. These are the little, do we see them here? The little arrows here, which influences the visibility on messages and also the message depth. The illustration here shows a nice example of message depth, where the comments that reply to other comments are indented a bit to the right. Now, subreddits are publicly accessible or have been publicly accessible, and it has been very easy to collect Reddit data as until very recently. And also, Reddit is quite heavy on verbal communication. You have limited multimodality. It's the complete opposite of Instagram, let's say. And this is why Reddit has become very popular with computational linguistics research generally. We know that Reddit is a site of online community formation. Rumor has it that Reddit is a manosphere with a lot of sexism. That might hold true for certain subreddits, but certainly not for all of them, and definitely not for the ones I have been studying in their entirety. So in the data collection that Jannis Androutsopoulos has also carried out for me with computational resources, we have collected material from the oldest and most popular German and Greek language subreddits called r/de and r/Greece. The German is, of course, much larger than the Greek one, but this is a function also of the population differences. The data retrieval has been carried out from a now defunct open access repository of Reddit data. Python has been used for data retrieval and R for computation and analysis. And Zhenya and I devised a sampling strategy in order to create a diachronic corpus by which 1,000 threads were collected twice a year. So every 6 months, in February and August, Zhenya collected 1,000 threads in order to collate a corpus from the earliest possible instances, 2009 up to 2021. Metadata collected with this corpus includes timestamps, flair, user IDs, and comment depth. And the ones that play a role in my research so far are the first two. What you see to the left here is the stats of the RDE diachronic corpus. We couldn't get data from 2013 for technical reasons at the time point of collection. So we have 23,000 threads with almost 400,000 comments, totaling several millions of words. A look at this table also shows how much popular Reddit became in the German-speaking world in the course of the tens, with the amount of comments and the time it took to complete 2,000 threads becoming less and less, and the amount of comments in these threads becoming more and more. What happened then is that Zhenya and I used initial examples in order for Zhenya to complete a regular expression, which was recursively refined to retrieve, to capture as many lexical items with case alternation as possible. And then I did a manual examination of the output, removed false positives such as Airbnb or Benelux or LaTeX, which are not alternating caps. In fact, they observe morphemic boundaries in abbreviations, resulting in a data set with 1,650 tokens and 763 types of alternating caps in a sum of 315 comments. Based on that material, I devised a set of annotation categories that were applied manually on this data set, including the relation of the segment in alternating caps to the entire comment, the syntax of that segment, its language, any other graphic cues such as quotation marking, the speaker to which the vehicle is credited, and any formulaic expressions. For example, if you have this example here, now you see it's in German, the bit in alternating caps, it's extra highlighted by me. So this is the vehicle, this yellow bit. The entire thing is the comment. So you have a vehicle that is part of a comment. In other cases, the vehicle is the comment itself. And you also have here quotation marks as an additional graphic means of indicating speakerhood, reported speech. And you have here, in this case, the phrase friends and family, who are the principals in Goffmanian terminology. So the speakers or the social types to which the vehicle, the bit in alternating caps, from which the speaker distances themselves from, is attributed or is credited. Let's do some stats before returning to examples. The first graph, these are the automated distribution and analysis that can be done with data and metadata. The first graph shows the frequency, the normalized frequency of alternating caps in the German data, showing a sharp rise and emergence in 2017, with just a few cases in 2018 and a sharp rise from 2019 onwards. This is basically consonant to the assumption that the SpongeBob meme was the starting point for the diffusion and adaptation of the alternating caps. Another graph, also produced automatically or computationally, is this one. What you have here on the X bar is the number of words that are set in alternating caps within a comment. And here you have the absolute numbers of how many comments contain this number of words in alternating caps. So what you see here at the utmost left is that out of 350 comments, only one word per comment is set in alternating caps. And then you have this cluster here with comments that include 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 words in alternating caps, a sum of 180 comments, and then it rapidly goes down. It's a bit like it's not exactly a long tail, but then so we have very few comments with very long stretches in alternating caps, and we have a lot of comments with either one word or something like a formulaic expression, a short phrase, a small clause. And you will see how this works qualitatively, pragmatically in the examples that follow. I also did some word clouds by removing function words and monosyllabic words. So this is a random excerpt, a screenshot, a cut from a larger word cloud, and it shows the kind of items that are set, or selection of the items that are set in alternating caps. And you can already see here a glimpse of the political discussions and the heated topics where opinions, positions are voiced, set in alternating caps. Whataboutism, climate refugees, left-wing extremism, prohibition culture, liberalism, and things like that. I also did, again, with the help of wortwolken.com, an analysis of the variance in typographic alternation. So these are three very common words, but, not, and is in German. And you see how many tokens are written in different ways, which goes to show, I think, that it is not the case that all the users who produce alternating caps use the same browser plugin. People take the effort to type alternating caps because, obviously, probably because they find in them a powerful, pragmatic resource to do double voicing. Now, popular metapragmatic terms, I'm coming to the latter part of the talk with some illustration of usage patterns. Popular metapragmatic terms for what alternating caps do in discourse are mocking, conveying mockery, being sarcastic. This is the stuff you find on Wikipedia and Urban Dictionary. So these are not too far off from empirical accuracy, but still pre-theoretic and perhaps a bit too general. We would like to go a bit deeper into that. And in order to go deeper into that, I use terms such as voice, stylization, double voicing, positioning, and alignment. The overall perspective that I take in this research is that online discussants use graphic cues, including the alternating caps, to enact voice, to enact ways of speaking that index or represent recognizable social positions and ideologies. These voices enacted or cued by alternating caps and other graphic resources offer a resource for positioning, for acts of positioning in online narrative or interaction. And people do draw on graphic resources to do positioning, to evaluate things, to position themselves, and they also display recognition of an alignment to others' stylized voices, to others' double voicing, and to the graphic cues that are deployed to this purpose. So a qualitative inquiry into how alternating caps work shows that people recognize them, people respond to them by repeating them or by grasping the mockery that is cued by alternating caps. Now, one thing we can ask is whether, as in the original meme, there is a visible repetition of content with a typographic difference. In some cases, this is the case. Yes, mocking is accomplished by doubling a visible utterance in alternating caps. So what you have here to the right, again from the German data, is that somebody took a photo of a COVID denier sign saying, an anti-vaxxer sign saying no access, no entry for vaccinated people. And this sign, is repeated in alternating caps. And by implication, the one who posts the photo mocks the sign and the COVID anti-vaxxer attitude. In most cases, however, there is no visible repetition of content with a typographic difference. So the mimicked utterance is absent, and we see only the mimicking itself. So we see only the typographic mimicry, as in this case. So you have here somebody sharing the news about a house that was washed out on the ocean because of the rising sea level. And the people who does the person who does the sharing writes, climate change is a hoax, in alternating caps. So you have a repetition of a typical saying by climate change deniers. And so people have to recognize the repetition and to identify the principle. So one question here is which properties of the vehicles, so the segments, and of the comments in their entirety support this inferencing. So how do people achieve that others understand the mimicry if the target of the mimicry itself, so the original, whatever the original might be, is absent? In the last part, in the last few minutes, I will show you very briefly and with a bit of skipping some examples for usage patterns of alternating caps. So I have been working qualitatively to devise different criteria in order to be able to identify usage patterns. I look at the sequential embedding of bits with alternating caps within a stretch of comments, at the textual embedding if you have longer comments that include a bit in alternating caps. I look at dialogic relations, interactional relations within and across comments, and also the discourse semantics of the respective thread, and of course at the semantics of the comment and the bit in alternating caps, the vehicle itself. And I conclude, for the time being at least, on 3 usage patterns where the pragmatics of alternating caps is the same, but the way they are used is different in terms of textual embedding, dialogic staging, and things like that. Contrasting voices in dialogue, sequential interjections, and embedding in continuous text. I'll have more examples, but I'll show you maybe one example per case in order to leave some time for discussion. In the first pattern, we see people, commenters, setting up fictitious dialogues where the vehicle, the bit in alternating caps, is juxtaposed to one or more distinct voices which come in default spelling. So in a very usual case, you have the writer's position, and juxtaposed to this another position set in alternating caps. Okay, and in order to understand what's going on, of course, you have to look at the sequential context within the comment and also across comments in the vicinity of a comment. So here's an example. Again, you have the translation to the right. Here, people comment on a news story on how the German conservatives, CDU, blamed a computer hacker with no reason. And this is an entire comment of a person writing, all other companies would say thanks to this person because they discovered a leak. And CDU just says hackers are evil. Okay, so this mimics and mocks on how ridiculous the Conservative Party's reaction has been. And this sense of ridiculousness is amplified through the alternating caps. Another example is here. So this is entirely set. The first 2 bits are set from the perspective of a bank that charges high account fees. This is what the people are commenting, talking about in this particular thread. So this one person writes, you don't want to pay €7.5 per month for a bank account, then go somewhere else. And then a line break. And then the next one reads, the online banks will destroy us all. And then the writer returns to their own viewpoint and say, you reap what you sow. So the first 2 bits are from the perspective of the bank, first throwing out customers and then deploring the fact that no more customers are there. And this is concluded with a moral judgment or the moral lesson, so to say. This is a longer one where, again, the voice of a therapist is staged. Again, you see how much effort people take in order to stage these little stories. And by so doing, they use alternating caps to recreate social dialogues and social tensions here between a patient and an esoteric therapist who basically recommends bullshit. That's the idea here. And this is commented before the alternating caps and after the alternating caps. And Utes, the therapist's voice, is set in alternating caps. In a second pattern, the vehicle makes up an entire comment. So in all of these cases that you saw, the vehicle is just a part of a longer comment involved in some sort of stage dialogue. In other cases, we have the vehicle as an entire comment, and the dialogic contrast of voices, which is, I think, by definition key to the use of alternating caps, is accomplished within the comment sequence across several comments rather than within one message. Here we found multi-parting discussions where some participants chime in and use alternating caps to produce response cries, I would say, or interjections to voice positions that are already established in the ongoing resource. So this is a bit more difficult to parse. It requires more attention to the thread, to the sequential unfolding of the thread, to what other people are saying or writing. Here's my example on this, and here people discuss about the conditions of people who work at food delivery companies. The first person here, this is not the original poster, but the commenter says grocery delivery companies achieve 10 minutes delivery by placing employees under enormous stress and exploiting them. One person responds to that by quoting these two bits, 10 minutes delivery, placing under enormous stress, and ironically says, well, isn't that a thing? Na sowas. Then the first person, so this is a dialogue between two persons, the first person says, but we're like a family here, sets in alternating caps. And so the caps here are the cue of voice shifting towards a typical perspective of such a food delivery companies, a startup that sort of compensates or wants to compensate low pay by a familiar, intimate atmosphere. We're like a family here. And the next person gets the cue and says, get it, basket of fruits. So these are the goodies that startups deliver or offer instead of a good pay, basket of fruits, chocolate bars, and then the first person again says, or the other person says, well, you don't need a staff association, then everything is fine in your company. So you have a chain of irony initiated by this one chiming in alternating caps. And looking at the corpus with the 350 comments, you find numerous instances of such chiming in or such response cries, always starting with but left-wing extremism, but this and but that. So these are chimes into the ongoing discourse in response to something else, voicing a position that is clearly ridiculed or mocked at. Last point, and just one example for that, and here we have a shrinking of the vehicle. So the vehicle is part of a longer comment, and sometimes, as we have seen quite often even, it is just one single word that is said in alternating caps. So this clearly presupposes that participants in these Reddit discussions recognize alternating caps and share a common understanding of their pragmatics. And we have different genres, and these quick shifts to a different voice are accomplished or cued or made visible by alternating caps. And in some cases, there's nothing else to signify the shift of voice than the alternating cap. This is the example we had before, maybe one Greek example, and then I'll skip the next one. So this is a thread about some news that a priest in Greece stole money from the parish treasury. And the commenter says that the most times the Holy Fathers violate something or a sense of moral, some archbishop comes up and declares that these actions do not represent our religion, and everything's good again. So again, here you have a multiple queuing with alternating caps and reported speech, and you have the principal, the archbishop, and bringing a different social voice and making clear that you find this ridiculous or in some other way awkward. Okay. So conclusions, why graphic cues are worth studying. Maybe I could persuade you about that. Maybe three things here. Graphic cues are examples of the global-local interplay, the global diffusion and local appropriation of semiotic resources and cultural globalization. Remember that this meme came up in 2017, and since then, so people have been very eager and very quick in appropriating these graphic memes in order to do pragmatic work in digital discourse. And we see on this example how semiotic features travel across time and space by means of digital networks adopted by online communities and reaching a certain level, even a high level of metapragmatic salience or awareness in distinct communities than the country and language of origin. We also see on the example of graphic cues the creative appropriation and transformation of graphic resources to accomplish pragmatic and interactional work. And as perhaps the analysis demonstrate, graphic cues such as the alternating caps are a useful test site for teasing out methodological dialogue between computational, quantitative distributional analysis and interactional sequential analysis, and also graphemic microanalysis. I think that we have also evolutionary processes here. So we see new graphic cues coming up. So it's not the case that people do contextualization work only with emoji. We see a lot of mobilization of written language and punctuation and graphic features for that. Last point, the generic popular description of alternating caps as mocking is accurate, but not sufficient. The usage observed in Greek and German data does not involve explicit repetition of a mocked utterance. Rather, comments display fragments of a mimicked voice set in alternating caps, and identifying whose voice this is requires creative inferencing by participant, which is in part supported by heavily intertextual, heavily formulaic utterances in the vehicle. So we see that the localized usage is not determined, is initiated, but not determined by the original meme. It is also, as a last point, remarkable that people seem to make quite some semiotic effort to do positioning work or to cue their positioning work with these alternations. And we also see that alternating caps are used with remarkable fluidity, apparently based on sedimented social pragmatic knowledge in these specific communities of practice. There's hardly any explanation or misunderstanding. What we see are implicit alignments. So people display alignment, display recognition of others' use of alternating caps, and acknowledgements of understanding. Thank you very much for your patience and for being here. Okay.
Unfortunately, I wasn't there in the beginning of the presentation, and I just posted the introduction in the chat for everyone to read. Thank you very much, Jannis, for this inspiring presentation. The floor for questions is open. Okay, so Max Rövers posted in the chat. Max, do you want to ask your question yourself? You could just...
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Okay.
So I think it helps to have it in the chat because I'm trying to indicate the caps that I'm thinking about here. But some of the examples that you give for me are kind of a different category than the purely alternating caps, where subsequent strings of caps lock have an additional meaning for me of kind of a hysterical speaker. And I was wondering, do you see any sort of patterning in that as well in your data, or am I diving too deep now?
No, that's great. Thanks a lot. So what I did is, as I showed in a slide with these very short function words, that even words such as but and yes and things like that are alternated on in many different ways. So, and the pragmatics being roughly similar. I'll come back to that in a moment. So I think that people take some liberty in alternating without this leading to a loss of meaning or to confusion. I guess you're absolutely right with respect to the original pattern, but so my conclusion would be that people don't strictly follow the original at this micro level of alternation. But so there is a more gestalt-like orientation to alternating, and which ensures that it becomes salient. Now, I think you're absolutely on track when you say that there's the implication that the mimic voice is overreacting, being hysterical. So this actually I see as a potential discourse meaning, pragmatic meanings of all alternating caps. But then again, I also realize that this meaning is sort of tainted or calibrated depending on the local context. So in some cases, it's ridiculous. In other cases, it's hysterical. In other cases, it's downright absurd or grotesque, what the vehicle says. A notion that I found very useful there is the indexical field, a term coined by Penelope Eckert in social linguistics to say that certain social linguistic variables have a general meaning, which is then calibrated according to context. So like the ing variable, sometimes it means intimate, other times it means sloppy or something like that. So I think that the general meaning in that sense of alternating caps is there is a distance between my perspective and the vehicle. And second, the vehicle is sort of set in negative perspective. But how this is negative, whether this is hysterical or awkward or whatever, will be down to context. I haven't done experimental work. That would be useful moving on at this point, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's another question, actually two questions in the chat. Imane, do you want to ask your questions yourself? You can just open your mic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm also reading the comments.
Yeah, otherwise I'm just reading it out loud. So
yeah, so from my question onwards, I think.
Yeah, my question for you is, do you think that this form of graphical work is going to be the standard form of language, as this pragmatic work is going to be extended offline, and as we are feeding the large language models and AI is becoming increasingly an indispensable asset in our life? So what are your thoughts about this?
Yes. And another question is about the transfer across scripts. Now, one thing I would like to do, thank you for these, starting from the second one, what we know on the example of Greek is that it is possible to transfer the alternating caps to a different writing system. What I don't know and would very much like to figure out is whether it is possible to transfer alternating caps to another writing system that has a different to a language that has a different syllabic structure, let's say, or Hebrew or Arabic would be an exciting case to figure out. I don't know about that. I know that on the case of Greek and other alphabetic maybe or languages with phonemic scripts, it works. The first one, I don't think this is it can't be a standard alternating caps because it works against a standard, against the backdrop of a standard. So if everything is written in alternating caps, the meaning sort of disappears. Okay, so the meaning, the pragmatic meaning is carried and indexed by the graphemic, the typographic juxtaposition. So you need some sort of juxtaposition to be there. And also what I said before, these things work against the background of a very good, strong literacy skills. So you see this in the data. People write perfect German, orthographic German, and they on purpose switch and produce alternating caps or other graphic variations to produce graphic meaning. Language models and AI and ChatGPT. I'm sure ChatGPT knows alternating caps, but I would also guess that the description you would get from ChatGPT is quite a flat one. It's a generic definition, maybe a reference to SpongeBob. So some information is there, but no deeper analysis, of course, and I would guess no critical perspective. But of course, large language models learn with what they have been fed, and once more research is there on alternating caps, maybe they would get more sophisticated in that. Thank you. Louis.
Hi, Jannis. Thank you very much for your present. Hello. I had a question about kind of the history of alternating caps. I mean, because we know it existed for maybe over like 25 years at least. You know, in your own earlier research, you're talking about the language of hackers and crackers, and it's had this kind of graphostylistic effect. And you know, in my corpus of YouTube comments, even like pre-2017, there's people writing about how they hate people that write in alternating caps, like mocking that. But obviously this predates the SpongeBob meme where we have this change for irony or mocking or this other voicing. What do you have theories why we see this shift from like purely graphostylistic to a particular metapragmatic or pragmatic effect?
Absolutely. So we see what we see, and thank you for pointing this out. We see that case alternations have been there for some time for some time now as part of lead speak of registers of online writing, in order to estrange or to produce a strange effect or let's say a visual tone of language. And also McCulloch writes about this a little bit in her book, and I know that there is similar, there's evidence for that in your YouTube comment corpus. So I think that what the SpongeBob meme did is to streamline to streamline a form-function mapping. So there was no clear form-function mapping before that, and it was occasioned by that meme. And in this sense, alternating caps are different to other graphic cues, such as the one phenomenon, the indignation mark, that sort of evolved more organically without being initiated by a meme. So yes, the answer would be, I don't know why that happened in that particular time point. I think it's just contingent, it's a coincidence. But what happened after that meme is that people sort of realized the potential form-function mapping and took on that and applied that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another one, maybe. Yeah.
Max Hofrichter.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. Very interesting. Before I start, and I was wondering about the use of indignation marks. You talked about them as being somewhat similar in their maybe pragmatic effect to alternating caps, but I've also come across them when I was doing some research on rants on Reddit as sort of a marker of extreme emotional involvement as well. And I was wondering if there was also maybe like a distancing in sort of a self-distancing from sort of statements that are attributed to the speaker, but sort of are a bit hyperbolic in nature and sort of are
Yes.
a more extreme version of
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, great. These are great observations. So we know that from the literature and urban dictionary from back in the day that the indignation mark by this or other names also emerged as a sign of irony or sarcasm or mockery. So it's to mock somebody else's usage or somebody else's exaggerated usage. And in the Reddit data, especially in early German Reddit data, I have come across two. I too have come across this sort of own perspective exaggeration. And so I do take the point. So it's a marker, let's say, of awareness of being too exaggerated or too affective. But what happens in the course of the tense with the indignation mark, and I've written about that, is that its use has become more politicized through a gradual association of the vehicle with right-wing populism and conservative stances. So in that case, the vehicle is not the mark itself, but the statement that preceding to it. So the statement that is concluded by the indignation mark is the vehicle. And so people started using the indignation marks as a way to distance themselves or to mock populist, right-wing populist discourse. And it seems to me that this new usage, this politicized usage, sort of superseded the more fluctuating usage around the early tense, where indeed the indignation mark was also used to mark or to index excessive excitement. In some cases, also in some examples that I showed and that I have in the data, both alternating caps and indignation mark occur together, which is another evidence of their similar pragmatic work, I would say. But yes, there are other, let's say, pragmatic shades, and I think this is absolutely right.
Louis asks in the chat whether there's a difference between the indignation mark.
Not at a more global level, I think, Louis. So it depends on the description. If the description we produce is that we have cues of double voicing and cues of distancing from this other voice, I don't see a difference between the allographs. On a more local level, we might find differences in usage, such as that one person produces the spelled out numerals, the other doesn't, or such that one and the same person would spell out the numeral in order to be even more hyperbolic than when just writing the one. This I wouldn't rule this out, but I think that at a more abstracted level, there is no pragmatic difference in the double voicing work that they do. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think time's up.
Time's up.
Are there any further comments? Otherwise, I would. Okay. People are thinking. Okay. Then we will finish the presentation. Thank you so much, Jannis. And do you want to announce the next talk, or shall I do it?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So the next talk will be on March 28th, and it's by Sandra Kübler and on hate speech.